It was late autumn in the small Georgia town of Cedar Springs, the kind of place where front porches leaned forward as if to hear the neighborhood gossip. The air carried that brittle chill, and the maple leaves had turned the color of rusted copper. Daniel Grant, a man who once commanded entire boardrooms with a single sentence, stepped out of the Blacktown car. It was his first time back in 15 years. In that time he had become one of the youngest black billionaires in America, a name spoken with equal parts awe and resentment in the business world. But this homecoming was not planned. It wasn't for a speech, or a funeral, or even nostalgia. It was because of the text message. 2 words from an old neighbor he barely remembered. "He's starving." Daniel didn't want to believe it. His adopted father, William Price, was a man of dignity, the kind who wore clean shirts even when the washing machine was broken, the kind who wouldn't accept a dime he hadn't earned. This was the man who had rescued Daniel from a foster system that chewed boys up and spat them out, meaner, smaller, and quieter than before. And now, starving. Daniel's shoes crunched over the cracked pavement as he rounded the corner onto Willow Street. His eyes caught movement ahead, and there it was, the moment that would burn itself into his memory forever. William Price, 73 years old, hunched forward, holding out a small plastic container to the woman next door. She shook her head, stepping back. He wasn't begging loudly, he wasn't making a scene, but Daniel knew that body language, the quiet slump of a man who had run out of options. The billionaire's throat tightened. He had closed billion-dollar deals, survived boardroom coups, and stared down Wall Street predators without blinking. But this knocked the air out of him. Before Daniel could call out, William turned, and their eyes met. There was no smile, no surprise. Only a flicker of shame, quickly buried under a mask of calm. Daniel stepped forward, but William Sip's words stopped him cold. "You shouldn't have come back, son." That was the moment Daniel knew. This was not just about hunger. This was about something far deeper, uglier, and more dangerous than he could see yet. And here sits what that moment teaches us. When someone says you shouldn't have come back, it's not always a warning for your safety. Sometimes it's a confession that the ground you're standing on has been poisoned long before you arrived. Now, we'll uncover the hidden history between Daniel, William, and the small-town machine that turned a proud man into a beggar. Long before the Blacktown car ever rolled back into Cedar Springs, William Price had been somebody. He wasn't rich, but he was respected, a skilled carpenter who could shape wood into something so precise it felt alive. People would drive from 2 counties over just to get a Price-built rocking chair or dining table. His hands were his reputation, and his reputation was his livelihood. And that was exactly what made him a target. See, Cedar Springs was run by a quiet, smiling kind of power, a good old boys network that didn't need to shout to control you. They owned the banks, the land, the local paper, and even the sheriff's office. In their world, a black man could do well, but not too well, not well enough to outshine them. The trouble started the year Daniel was 15. William had taken on a contract to renovate the mayor's home. Everything went smoothly, until William refused to cut corners with cheaper, unsafe materials. That one act, a simple refusal to compromise his integrity, lit a fuse. First, the mayor's friends stopped hiring him. Then the building inspector started finding code violations in his shop. The bank reassessed his mortgage and raised his rates. Within 2 years, William's thriving business was gasping for air. Daniel remembered those nights, the 2 of them sitting at the kitchen table, the smell of sawdust still clinging to William's shirt, as he explained bills in a calm voice, but Daniel could hear the strain underneath. That's when Daniel made his choice, to leave. Not because he wanted to abandon William, but because he believed he could fight better from outside Cedar Springs. He earned a scholarship, studied finance, and entered the world of mergers, acquisitions, and high-risk investments. Daniel thrived. He turned a few lucky breaks into a calculated empire, but while his name rose, Williams quietly disappeared from the phone books. The letters Daniel sent home slowed, then stopped. Calls went unanswered. Whenever he tried to visit, William would insist he was fine and tell him to focus on his work. It wasn't until Daniel got that 2-word text, "He's starving," that he realized the truth. This wasn't just bad luck. This was systemic erasure. The same Cedar Springs that had once nodded politely to William had slowly, deliberately stripped him of everything, until even his pride had been whittled down to nothing. And here sits what that history teaches us. Sometimes the root cause of a man's downfall isn't a single mistake, but a web of small, deliberate cuts, each one made by a system that knows you'll bleed slower that way. But Daniel didn't know yet. There was another reason William had told him not to come back, and it had nothing to do with pride, and everything to do with danger. The next morning, Daniel sat across from William in the small, dim kitchen. The house smelled faintly of cold coffee and old wood. No laughter, no clinking of tools from the workshop out back, just a silence that felt heavier than the air. William's hands were thinner now, the skin stretched over bones like the grain on weathered oak. He wouldn't meet Daniel's eyes for long. "Son," William began, "you can sit help me. Not here. Not now." Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I can. I will. Just tell me who sits behind this." William shook his head. "It sits not about one man. It sits about the whole board. You pull one piece, the whole thing crashes, and they so make sure you stir standing right where it lands." That was the first time Daniel had heard it put so plainly. The board, not a corporate boardroom. A shadow one made of landowners, bankers, business owners, and politicians. They decided who got the contracts, who got the loans, whose businesses mysteriously caught fire. "You've built yourself something clean out there," William said quietly. "Don said come back here just to get it burned down." Daniel looked out the window. Across the street he could see the mayor's car, parked, engine running, with 2 men inside watching the house. He realized in that moment, William wasn't just broke, he was under surveillance. And here was the fork in the road. Option 1. Leave now, transfer money quietly into William's account, and keep his billion-dollar empire intact. Option 2. Stay, dig and risk everything. Wealth, reputation, safety, to confront the same system that had crushed the man who raised him. There's a truth most people don't talk about. The choice between survival and justice rarely comes with a perfect outcome. You almost always lose something important. But in Daniel's case, survival meant letting William die with the weight of injustice still on his shoulders. He didn't know it yet, but his next decision would set in motion a chain of events that no one in Cedar Springs, not even the board, was prepared for. A single action was about to flip the entire outcome. Daniel didn't answer William right away. He just sat there, his mind shifting gears, not into anger, but into calculation. Most people in Cedar Springs remembered him as the kid William adopted, the boy who used to run errands for the woodshop and carry his father's toolbox. They had no idea what he had become. Over the last 15 years, Daniel had built his fortune through mergers no one saw coming, buying undervalued companies, stripping away inefficiencies, and rebuilding them into unstoppable machines. But what made him dangerous wasn't the money, it was the information. In his world, power didn't just come from what you owned, it came from what you knew, and who you could quietly call at 2 a.m. without explaining yourself. That morning, while William made coffee, Daniel excused himself to take a walk. Instead he stepped into the alley behind the house, pulled out his phone, and sent a message to an encrypted contact list only 3 people in the world knew existed. Need discreet background on Cedar Springs board, land records, corporate ties, offshore accounts, any political donations. Quiet, immediate. He slipped the phone back in his pocket and returned inside. William thought he was just staring out the window, but Daniel was mapping in his mind every possible way to dismantle a network like the board, legally, financially, and socially, without letting them know it was happening. It started with a simple insight. Cedar Springs was a small town. Small towns hide their corruption in plain sight, under church fundraisers, ribbon cuttings, and handshake deals. The board relied on people believing that things have always been this way. Daniel's advantage: he had played this game at the highest level. He had broken corporations bigger than Cedar Springs without anyone realizing it until the ink was dry. And here sits what that moment teaches us. Sometimes your real strength is not in meeting force with force, but in quietly being 3 moves ahead before your opponent even realizes the game has begun. Still, Daniel understood intelligence was only the first weapon. To take on the board, he would need a trigger, something that would force them to reveal themselves. He didn't instead have to wait long. Because that very night, William Price would be humiliated in front of the entire town, and it would become Daniel's first opening shot. The annual Cedar Springs Harvest Dinner was supposed to be harmless. A community potluck, a charity auction, a night where old grudges were set aside for the sake of smiling photographs in the local paper. But Daniel could see it the moment they walked in. This was a stage. And William was the mark. The hall smelled of cornbread and slow-cooked meat, but the air was taut, like everyone was waiting for something to happen. Tables were decorated with burlap runners and mason jars of chrysanthemums. The mayor stood near the entrance, greeting each guest, except William. His eyes slid right past him, as if the old man were invisible. Daniel noticed the murmurs, people leaning toward each other, glancing at William, then looking away quickly. He knew this body language. This was the prelude to a planned humiliation. It happened halfway through the auction. A local banker, one of the board's quieter members, stood up and announced a special donation for the night, a handcrafted rocking chair, in the classic William Price style. The audience clapped politely, until the banker added, "Since Mr. Price no longer makes them, I figured we bring back the memory." Laughter rippled through the hall. Daniel's jaw tightened. The banker wasn't done. He gestured to a teenager standing beside him, and to keep it authentic, we even had a young apprentice try his hand at building it. What do you think, folks? Better than the original? The room roared. William sat frozen, his face unreadable. He didn't stand up, he didn't leave. That was the cruelty. They knew his pride would keep him seated, absorbing every word, rather than causing a scene. Daniel's fingers curled around the edge of the table. His instincts screamed to stand, to tear the room apart with the truth. But years in the corporate arena had taught him the cost of reacting too soon. This was their move. They wanted him to swing wildly. Instead, he leaned back, watching faces, memorizing every smirk and every whisper. Because the thing about a public breakdown is this: it's not always the person on stage who's breaking. Sometimes it's the entire system, revealing its arrogance, showing you exactly where it's weak. By the end of the night, Daniel had a list of names, connections, and tells, all handed to him on a silver platter, by the board itself. But William didn't speak the whole way home. Not until they reached the porch, where he said quietly, "You see now why I didn't want you here." Daniel nodded slowly. "I see exactly why I have to be here." He didn't know it yet, but within 48 hours, a single conversation would spark the comeback, and it wouldn't start in Cedar Springs at all. The morning after the harvest dinner, Daniel rose before the sun. He sat at William's kitchen table, sipping black coffee, staring at the faint steam curling from the mug. The room was still, except for the occasional creak of the old house settling. Humiliation has two possible outcomes. It either bends you until you break, or it hardens you until you're unbreakable. Daniel chose the second. He opened his phone and saw a reply to the encrypted message he said sent 2 days before, a single line. Cedar Springs Board, follow the land. Attached was a document, a spider web of shell companies, LLCs and property deeds. It showed something no one in town seemed to realize over the past 15 years. Nearly 40% of Cedar Springs' most valuable land had been quietly transferred into holding companies tied to 3 families, all members of the board. The pattern was precise, predatory. But it wasn't the land grab itself that caught Daniel's attention. It was how they were doing it, buying property from struggling owners at a fraction of its worth, often after mysterious hardships, fires, sudden tax hikes, surprise code violations. William Sipp's shop had been one of them. That's what that moment teaches us. Injustice often hides in paperwork. The cruelty isn't always in the street fight, it's in the fine print. That same morning, Daniel made a call to a mentor he hadn't spoken to in years. Marion Carter, a retired federal prosecutor, with a memory like a steel trap and a personal grudge against small-town corruption. When Marion answered, her voice was dry and sharp. "I hear you poking around Cedar Springs. You looking to make noise, or make change?" "Change," Daniel said. "Permanent." Within an hour, Marion was on board. Her advice was simple but potent. Don't go at them head on. You lose. Go quiet, go slow, and when you hit, make sure it sits in public. The plan began to take shape. Build an untraceable case against the board. Target the weak link first, the one most likely to break under pressure. Use the town's own appetite for gossip and spectacle to turn public opinion before the board even knew it was under attack. By nightfall, Daniel wasn't just thinking about saving William, he was thinking about something bigger, pulling the board's power up by the roots so it could never grow back. And the first move in that silent war would happen where no one expected it, at the dusty, overlooked county records office. The Cedar Springs County Records Office was the kind of place where time felt slow and dusty. Yellowed maps hung on the walls, and the air smelled faintly of paper and old carpet cleaner. The clerk at the desk barely looked up when Daniel walked in, just waved him toward the public records computer with a bored hand. Perfect. Daniel didn't need attention, he needed quiet. Over the next 3 days, he returned again and again, posing as a visiting investor, researching historical property trends. He scanned deeds, mortgage records, and tax assessments, all of it feeding into a secure cloud database Marion had set up. Patterns emerged. The board's land acquisitions weren't random. They formed a corridor, a swath of properties stretching from the highway bypass to the edge of downtown, and right in the middle of it sat 3 holdouts: a church, an elderly widow's farm, and William's house. Now Daniel understood why they hadn't just let William fade quietly. They needed his land, and in their eyes starving him out was the fastest way to get it. Here's what that moment teaches us. When someone's cruelty feels personal, it's often just business in disguise. They dehumanize you because it makes the transaction cleaner in their minds. But Daniel wasn't just collecting paper, he was building leverage. Through a friend in Atlanta, he quietly bought a failing farm supply company that serviced the entire county, including businesses owned by 3 board members. Within 2 weeks, he controlled their delivery schedules and wholesale pricing. no one noticed. Not yet. He also funded the local high school's vocational program, paying for new tools and materials for their carpentry class. Officially, it was philanthropy. Unofficially, it was a message William Price's name was back in circulation, associated not with pity, but with skill and value. Small wins, no applause, no headlines. Each move was like placing a stone in a foundation, invisible to the casual eye, but preparing for a structure that, when revealed, would be impossible to tear down. By the end of the month, the board still thought they were watching a billionaire son make a sentimental visit. They didn't know he was wrapping a net around them, tightening it thread by thread. And then, one careless mistake by a board member would hand Daniel the exact public opening he'd been waiting for. It happened at the Cedar Springs Founders Day celebration, the board's crown jewel event. The courthouse lawn was draped in bunting, the air thick with the smell of barbecue, and a local bluegrass band played under the gazebo. It was a stage built for one purpose, to show the town who really ran it. Daniel had been waiting for this day. 2 weeks earlier, one of the board members, a real estate developer named Whitaker, had made a mistake. He'd bragged at a Rotary Club lunch about closing in on the last 3 properties, blocking the new business park. Someone recorded him. The audio had made its way to Daniel. And now, he was going to use it. The community recognition portion of the celebration was always carefully choreographed. Speeches, photo ops, applause on cue. This year the mayor planned to surprise the crowd by announcing the donation of Williams' land for a new youth center, framing it as an act of generosity. Of course it was a lie. Daniel let them start. He stood near the edge of the crowd, hands in his pockets, as the mayor painted William as an elder willing to pass the torch for the future. The applause was polite, the cameras rolling. Then Daniel stepped forward. "Funny thing," he said, loud enough for the microphone to pick up, "I didn't realize theft counted as community service." The lawn went still. Heads turned. The mayor froze. Daniel pulled his phone from his pocket and tapped the screen. Whitaker Stet's voice filled the air through the PA system. "Once we squeezed Price out, we have the whole corridor. We can flip it to the state for triple." A ripple of gasps moved through the crowd. People looked at William, then at the mayor, then at the board members standing near the podium. Daniel didn't raise his voice. "This is your board. This is how they see you, as pieces on a chessboard, as properties to be flipped." And they thought no one would ever hear it. Phones were up now, recording. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Daniel turned toward the mayor. "You still welcome to continue your speech, but know this. Every deed transfer, every tax assessment, every loan agreement tied to your board land corridor is now in the hands of the state attorney office, and the press." The band under the gazebo stopped playing. The crowd began murmuring, louder, sharper, more hostile toward the men and women in tailored suits. And here sits what that moment teaches us. The most devastating blows aren't always the loudest. Sometimes, they're the ones that make your opponent realize the fight is already over. The board had spent years controlling Cedar Springs from the shadows. In under 5 minutes, Daniel had dragged them into the sunlight, and they were wilting fast. But the real consequences hadn't even begun. The days after Founders Day were unlike anything Cedar Springs had seen in decades. The board members who had once walked into every meeting with casual authority now avoided the courthouse steps. Their names, and the Whitaker recording, ran on every local news station. Within a week, 2 resigned from their public roles. One lawyered up, another quietly left town. Marion's network moved quickly. Subpoenas were issued. Investigators began pulling tax and banking records. The land corridor deal, once a sure thing, was dead before the ink could dry. For William, the change was quieter, but no less powerful. Neighbors who had crossed the street to avoid him were now stopping by with food, offers to help fix up the shop, and awkward apologies. The high school carpentry students came to his porch one afternoon, carrying the first project from their new tools, a small wooden sign that read, "Price and Son." That's what that moment teaches us. When you dismantle injustice, the victory isn't just in punishing the guilty, it's in restoring the dignity of those they tried to erase. But there was a cost. Daniel's return to the city wasn't smooth. The board's allies in business, people he'd done deals with for years, started pulling away. A few contracts were postponed indefinitely. His name was now linked to a small-town scandal, and not everyone in his world respected that kind of fight. And yet, Daniel felt lighter. For years his success had been measured in numbers. Now it was measured in something harder to quantify, the knowledge that William would no longer suffer in silence, and that Cedar Springs had seen the truth with its own eyes. One evening, weeks after the fallout, Daniel found William back in the workshop, planing a piece of oak. The air smelled of sawdust again, and sunlight slanted through the dusty windows. William didn't look up. "You know you didn't have to do all this, right?" Daniel leaned in the doorway. Yeah, but some debts aren't measured in money. They worked in silence after that, father and son, side by side, shaping wood like nothing had ever been broken. But in Daniel's mind, one truth settled in like a weight he welcomed. This fight wasn't the end, it was the beginning. Months later, Cedar Springs had changed in small but undeniable ways. The board's shadow was thinner now, their grip loosened. The county commission meetings were fuller, louder, with more questions from people who once sat silent in the back. William's shop was open again, not as a business chasing profit, but as a community workshop. Young people came after school to learn, their laughter mingling with the hum of saws and the smell of freshly cut wood. On the wall, that Price and Son sign hung proudly. Daniel visited often, but he didn't try to run things. This was William's domain. His role had been to clear the field. Williams was to plant something lasting. Here's what that ending teaches us. Power doesn't only live in money, titles, or influence. Real power is the ability to restore what was stolen, dignity, opportunity, and the belief that a better future is worth fighting for. Injustice thrives in the dark, because it assumes no one will shine a light. But one person, acting with quiet precision, can burn a hole in the curtain big enough for everyone to see through. And that's the challenge I want to leave with you. Look around your own life, your own community. Where is the silence hiding injustice? Where are the good old boys networks pretending to be harmless traditions? And what's one action, small, deliberate, maybe even invisible at first, that you can take to start pulling at that thread? Because a single action can flip the entire outcome. And sometimes, the people who raised us deserve more than our success. They deserve our courage. If this story resonated with your values, like, comment, and subscribe. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to remind yourself that the fight for dignity is never over, and it's worth showing up for.